Oklahoma was once called Indian Territory. It was a big stretch of land. Most of it was set aside for Native American tribes. They had been moved there by the government. They came from their original lands in the east. This was a place where they could live, or at least that was the idea. But as time went on, things changed. More and more people moved west. White settlers wanted land. They wanted to farm. They wanted to start new lives, and they looked at Indian Territory, they saw it as empty or unused, even though people lived there. This idea that the land was empty grew strong. It was a big problem. People started to pressure the government. They wanted the land opened up. They wanted it for settlement. Railroad companies also pushed for this. They wanted to lay tracks. They wanted to expand, and they wanted towns to grow along their lines. This meant more business for them. So there was a lot of pressure. It came from many sides. There was one part of Indian Territory that became very important. It was called the unassigned lands. This area was not given to any specific tribe. It was just there. For a while, the government said no one could settle there, but people kept trying. They would sneak in. They would try to claim land. These people were called Sooners. They went in sooner than they were allowed. The government tried to kick them out. Soldiers were used for this, but it was hard to stop everyone. The Sooners kept coming back. They made the problem worse. They showed how much people wanted the land. The government finally gave in to the pressure. It was clear that stopping settlement was not working, and the demands were too strong. So a decision was made. The unassigned lands would be opened. This was a big deal. It meant a huge change for the area. It meant a chance for thousands of people, a chance to get land. It was a chance to start over. For many, this was a dream. The date was set, April 22nd, 1889. At noon, that's when the land would be officially open. People could claim a quarter section, and that's 160 acres. It was free land, or almost free. You just had to live on it for 5 years and make improvements. Then it was yours. This promise drew people from everywhere. They came from all over the country. They heard the news, and they started moving. They wanted to be ready. Weeks before April 22nd, people began gathering. They went to the borders of the unassigned lands. There were 4 main starting lines. They were on the north, south, east, and west. People set up camps. They waited. They brought their families. They brought their wagons. They brought their horses. Some even came by train. The trains would stop right at the border. So people would jump off. They would get ready. The camps were full of excitement and fear. People talked about what they would do. They dreamed of their new farms. They planned where they would go. But they also worried. There was so much competition, so many people. Would there be enough land for everyone? Would they get a good spot? The best spots had good soil and water. Water was very important. No one knew for sure what would happen. It was a huge unknown. The days leading up to the rush were tense. The air was thick with anticipation. You could feel it. Thousands of people, all with the same goal. All waiting for one moment. The moment the signal would sound. The moment they could race in. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It was a human tide, ready to pour into a new land. All for the chance to own a piece of it, to make a home, to build a life. And the Sooners were still there, hiding, waiting. They wanted to get an unfair advantage. They wanted to be inside already. Before the signal, they hoped to claim the best land, and no one could stop them all. The government tried. Soldiers rode patrols. But the territory was vast, and the Sooners were clever. This added to the tension. It added to the feeling of chaos. Everyone knew it would be a race. But it would be a race with some people starting early. It wasn't fair, but that was the reality. So the stage was set. The land was ready. The people were ready. The government had made its decision. And the world watched. It was a unique event, a one-of-a-kind land opening. It would change the face of Oklahoma forever. And it would be remembered as one of the most incredible races in American history. All waiting for that one moment, the moment the clock struck noon, on April 22nd, 1889. Then came the day. April 22nd, 1889. The air was electric. Thousands upon thousands of people were gathered. They stretched for miles along the border lines. Horses stomped. Wagons rattled. People talked in hushed tones, or yelled in excitement. There were young men on fast horses, families in slow, creaky wagons. Some people were on foot. They carried what they could. Even some people rode on bicycles. They all wanted the same thing, land. The sun climbed higher. It was getting close to noon. The soldiers were in position. They were mounted on horses. They faced the crowd. Their job was to keep everyone back until the exact moment. But it was a nearly impossible job. There were simply too many people. The tension built. It was a thick, heavy feeling. You could almost touch it. Everyone held their breath. At precisely noon, the signal sounded. A bugle call rang out, or a gunshot cracked the air. It depended on where you were. But the sound was heard, and everything changed. The stillness broke. Exploded into motion. It was chaos, and speed, and noise. Horses bolted forward. Wagons lurched. Dust clouds immediately rose. They billowed up. They covered everything. You could hardly see. The ground shook. It vibrated with the sound of thousands of hooves and wheels. Where people screamed, they cheered, they urged their animals on. It was a wild, uncontrolled rush. Some people were prepared. They had fast horses. They knew where they wanted to go. They had studied maps. They had a plan. But many others just rode or ran. They went with the flow. They hoped for the best. They just wanted to find any piece of land, any spot that was open. The race itself was brutal. It was dusty. It was hot. People pushed. They shoved. They raced side by side. Some horses stumbled. Some wagons broke down. People fell. They were left behind. The strong, the fast, the lucky, they kept going. They kept pushing ahead. Trains also played a part. Special trains ran into the territory. They were packed with settlers. These trains moved fast, but they could only go so far, and they could only stop at certain points. Once the train stopped, people poured out. They jumped off. They started running. They tried to claim land near the tracks. This was prime land. It was good for future towns. The desperation was real. For many, this was their only chance. A chance to own land. A chance to escape poverty. A chance for a new life. So they put everything into it. Every ounce of energy. Every bit of hope. They pushed themselves to the limit. And their animals. The dust was a huge problem. It got everywhere. It clogged noses. It stung eyes. It made it hard to breathe at limited visibility. But people didn't stop. They couldn't. Stopping meant losing. Losing meant no land, and the distances were long. Some people raced for miles. They had to get past others. They had to get to a good spot. Not just any spot. A good spot. One with water. One with decent soil. This added to the pressure and the effort. The sounds were incredible. The pounding of hooves. The creaking of wagons. The shouts of men and women. The braying of mules. It was a symphony of chaos, all driven by the powerful desire for land. For a home. Many people saw others get ahead, or they saw people already on a spot. It was disheartening. But they kept going. They hoped to find something else, something just a little further, or a little off to the side. The hope was strong, even in the face of so much competition. The land rush of 1889 was not just a race. It was a spectacle. It was a moment in history. When thousands of ordinary people did something extraordinary, they risked everything. They raced into the unknown, all for the promise of a piece of land. It was a true test of endurance and of will, and it showed the power of that dream, the dream of owning your own land, a piece of America. So the signal went off, the race began, and people poured into the unassigned lands. It was a massive, uncontrolled rush, a surge of humanity, all heading for the same goal. And all of them, for a short time, were part of something huge, something that would be talked about for generations. It was a race against time, and against each other, for a stake in the new frontier. Once people found a spot, the next challenge began. Finding a place was one thing. Making it yours was another. The rules said you had to stake your claim. This meant you had to drive a stake into the ground, or set up some kind of marker. You had to show that you were there first. You had to declare your intent. People rushed to do this. They grabbed whatever they had. A shovel, a stick, anything. They dug it into the earth. They marked out their 160 acres. This was the first step. It was a physical act, saying this is mine. But it was only the first step. Many people found what they thought was a good spot. They staked it out, then they started looking around. They tried to find water, they tried to see the quality of the soil. They might walk the perimeter of their claim, just to get a feel for it. They imagined their farm. They imagined their home. But often, there were conflicts. Two people might arrive at the same spot at almost the same time. Or one person might claim a spot, only to find someone else already there. This happened a lot. Especially with the Sooners. These were the people who sneaked in early. They had a head start. They had often picked the best land. And they were already on it. Sometimes, they even had a small shack built. These conflicts could get heated. People would argue. They would yell. They might even fight. Some arguments ended with threats, or even violence. There were no real law enforcement officers out there at first. Not enough, anyway. So, it was often a matter of who was stronger. or who was more determined. The official process involved filing your claim. You had to go to a land office. These offices were set up in newly formed towns, places like Guthrie, Oklahoma City, Kingfisher, and Norman. But these towns didn't exist before the rush. They sprang up overnight, literally. So, people had to travel to these new land offices, and everyone was going at once. The lines were incredibly long, thousands of people waited for days, sometimes weeks. To get their paperwork done, they had to register their claim, they had to prove they were there first. They had to swear they hadn't been a Sooner. The land offices were overwhelmed. Clerks worked around the clock. But they couldn't keep up. The paperwork piled up. The lines grew longer. People slept in the streets. They cooked over campfires. They waited. They argued in line. They worried their claim would be taken or that they would be challenged. The laws were supposed to be clear. You had to physically occupy the land. You couldn't have been a Sooner. But proving all this was hard, and often people stretched the truth. Or they outright lied. It was a scramble. Everyone wanted to get their land made official. Sometimes, people who staked a claim left it to go file, and then someone else would come along. They would claim it again. This led to more disputes. It was a messy situation. The government tried to sort it out. But it took a long time. Many claims went to court. It dragged on for years. The challenges were not just about other people. It was also the land itself. Not all land was good. Some areas had poor soil. Some had no easy access to water. Finding water was crucial. You needed it for drinking, for farming, for animals. So, people rushed to claim land near streams or rivers, or where they thought a well could be dug. Building a home was also a big task. People arrived with very little, maybe a tent, or a few tools. They had to build shelter from scratch, fast. The weather could be harsh. They needed protection. So, people started building crude shelters, sod houses, small shacks made from whatever wood they could find. It was raw survival. The sense of community started right away, even with all the competition. People helped each other. They shared tools. They shared food. They looked out for their neighbors. Because everyone was in the same boat. Everyone was starting fresh from nothing. But the claiming process was full of stress and uncertainty. No one was truly secure in their claim until the paperwork was filed. And even then, it could be challenged. It was a wild, lawless time in many ways. A time when determination and a bit of luck meant everything. And so, the land was claimed. Or at least, marked. The race from the border was over. But the race to make it legal, to make it yours, had just begun. And that was an even harder struggle for many. It was a time of both great hope and great difficulty. All for a piece of the American dream. A piece of Oklahoma. After the initial rush, a new set of problems began. The territory was open, land was claimed. But that was it. There were no towns, no roads, no stores, no schools, just raw land, and thousands of people, all trying to start a new life. From nothing, people arrived on their claims. They often had only a tent or a wagon to sleep in. The first priority was shelter. They quickly built sod houses. These were houses made from strips of prairie grass and dirt. They were simple, but they kept out the wind and rain. They were quick to build. People also built small shacks with whatever wood they could find. Towns sprang up overnight. Literally. On April 22nd, places like Guthrie and Oklahoma City were just open land. By the next day, they were bustling tent cities. Thousands of people converged on the spots where they thought towns would grow. They quickly surveyed streets. They put up tents for businesses, banks, general stores, saloons. It's a frenzy of building and organizing, but this sudden growth brought huge challenges. There was no water system, no sewage, no organized law enforcement. Disease was a problem. Theft was common. It was a frontier town, but on a massive scale, and it all happened in a few days. One of the biggest issues was the Sooners. These were the people who had entered the territory early. Before the official start, they had hidden. They had marked out prime land. Sometimes they even had small cabins built. When the official rush started, they just emerged. They pointed to their claims. They said they were first. This caused huge resentment. The people who followed the rules felt cheated. They had waited. They had raced fairly. And then they found others already settled on the best land. It wasn't fair. The feeling was very strong. People hated the Sooners. The government tried to deal with Sooners. Land office officials were supposed to investigate claims. If someone was found to be a Sooner, their claim was canceled, and they were supposed to be removed. But proving someone was a Sooner was hard, and often Sooners were well organized. They had witnesses, they had made it look legitimate, sometimes the community took matters into its own hands. People would confront Sooners. They might try to physically remove them. There were fights. There were threats. It was a dangerous time. Sometimes Sooners were driven off their claims by angry mobs. Other times, they managed to hold on. They simply outlasted the opposition. The legal battles over claims were endless. The land offices were swamped with disputes. Two people might have a stake on the same piece of land, both claiming they arrived first, both swearing they were not Sooners. It took years to sort out these conflicts. Many cases went to court. Lawyers got rich. The lack of established government and law meant a lot of disorder. Vigilante justice was not uncommon. People had to protect their own property and their own claims. It was a might makes right situation in many places, especially in the early days. Despite the chaos, people kept building. They kept working. Farmers started plowing their land. They tried to plant crops. Merchants opened their shops. They tried to sell goods. Life had to go on, even in the middle of all the confusion. The sheer number of people was staggering. In one day, over 50,000 people poured into the unassigned lands, and they set up communities. They organized, they started to elect town councils, they formed their own law enforcement. It was a testament to human resilience and the drive to create order, but the legacy of the Sooners lingered. It was a stain on the early history of Oklahoma. It showed that not everyone played fair. It showed the desperation, and it showed that the rules were hard to enforce on the frontier. It created a deep sense of injustice for many. The first few years after the rush were tough. The new settlers faced droughts, they faced crop failures, they faced the constant threat of claim jumping, and they faced the challenge of building a society from scratch with very little help, and with a lot of internal conflict. So, the land was settled, but the work was far from over. The immediate aftermath was a period of intense struggle, a struggle against nature, a struggle against each other, and a struggle to establish law and order in a brand new territory. All born from that single, incredible day. April 22nd, 1889, the Oklahoma land rush of 1889 left a huge mark. It changed everything for the territory. In just one day, it turned a vast empty land into a place buzzing with people. And it set the stage for Oklahoma to become a state. The most obvious impact was population growth. Before the rush, there were very few non-Native American settlers. After the rush, tens of thousands poured in, and more kept coming. Towns that were just open prairie one day were cities of tents and quickly built structures the next. Guthrie and Oklahoma City are prime examples. They went from nothing to major population centers in a flash. This rapid growth meant instant communities. People had to organize fast. They had to create local governments. They had to build infrastructure, they had to build schools, churches, everything was done at lightning speed. It was a testament to the pioneers' drive. They didn't wait for anyone. They just did it. The land itself was transformed. Wild prairie land quickly became farmland. People plowed the soil. They planted crops, they built fences, the landscape changed from open plains to a patchwork of farms and new towns. This changed the ecosystem. It also changed the way of life. The land rush was also a major step in the overall opening of Indian Territory. After 1889, more and more lands were opened, some through other rushes, some through lotteries. The idea of Native American sovereignty over the land was steadily eroded. This had a profound and often negative impact on the Native American tribes who lived there. Their lands were continually reduced. Their way of life was disrupted. This is a crucial part of the story. So, to answer the question, was there a stampede for land in Oklahoma? Yes, absolutely. It was the definition of a stampede. Think about what a stampede means. It's a sudden wild rush, or usually of animals, but in this case, of people. 6-1. Speed thousands of people raced across the land as fast as their horses, wagons, or legs could carry them. It was a full-out sprint, night 2. The start was chaotic. The race itself was chaotic. The claiming process was chaotic. There was little order. 3, sheer numbers, tens of thousands of people moved into a previously unsettled area in a single day. This volume of people creates a stampede effect. 4, desperation and competition. Everyone wanted land. Everyone needed land. This drove an intense competition. People pushed hard. They took risks. This urgency fuels a stampede. 5, uncontrolled movement. Once the signal sounded, it was largely an uncontrolled movement of people. Each person was trying to get ahead. The image of the land run is etched into American history. It's an image of horses thundering across the prairie, of wagons jostling, of people shouting, of dust rising to the sky. It represents a dramatic moment of westward expansion. It shows the American desire for land and opportunity. The legacy of the 1889 land run is still visible today. Oklahoma City and Guthrie, for instance, owe their very existence to that one day. The grid patterns of many towns were laid out in a hurry. You can still see that. The spirit of starting fresh, of building from nothing, is a part of Oklahoma's identity. But it also reminds us of the darker sides, the displacement of Native Americans, the unfairness of the Sooners, the struggles and hardships faced by those trying to make a living on the frontier. It was not an easy dream for most. The Oklahoma land rush was a pivotal event. It was a unique way of settling land. It was dramatic. It was exciting. And yes, it was a stampede. A human stampede, driven by hope, driven by need, and driven by the promise of a new life on the open prairie. It changed the territory forever. And it remains a powerful story in the history of the American West. It was a race for land and for a future. And it happened like a thunderous wave, a wave of humanity, all at once.